Hi, I'm Curious Vedant, and welcome to the Season 5 finale episode of my podcast. Today, my guest is a fellow podcaster and a blogger, Lefteris. He runs the Lefteris Science podcast and a blog with a similar name. Hi, Lefteris. Welcome to my show.
Hi, Evan. Thank you very much for having me, and I hope that I'll do justice on the last episode of your season.
Yeah, thank you. I'm really excited for this interview.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm very excited as well. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, podcasting is really fun, isn't it?
Yes, it is. You get to meet a lot of people, and you get to learn a lot of things that you wouldn't otherwise learn because you get to meet so many people. And you also have to learn a lot of things about other things other than the interview that you're doing. You have to learn about how to edit the podcast. You have to learn how to market the podcast. So there's many, many things that you can learn. And a lot of mistakes you can do while learning.
Yeah. So, Lefteris, I'm curious to know, what is your podcast about?
So my podcast is called Lefteris Science, as you mentioned. And I'm trying to figure out what, how, and why are scientists doing what they're doing. I believe that if we look into what academia is doing right now, we get to peek into a little of our future and see what are the things that are happening there. And through my PhD, I did my PhD in NUS, and I finished in 2019. I met a lot of people, and I met a lot of them who were very, very smart. They were great scientists, but many times their work was just stuck into that academia shelter where it could not really be communicated with the outside world. And a lot of times people are asking me, what am I doing, or what is this person doing, and asking me to explain different things. And I really, really enjoyed stripping the complexities out of topics and trying to figure out like the essence of what it is that it's important in the work. Why is it important? And also learn a little bit about the person themselves, like how did they end up doing that work?
Oh, that's really interesting. And make sure to listen to a few of your podcasts.
Thank you. I hope you do, and tell me what you think of them.
Yeah, I will. How and why did this podcast series start?
So I used to do a radio show when I was in Greece. I used to do a music radio show for 2 hours every Saturday and every Sunday. And I always enjoyed inputting a little bit of like science facts into my music show, where in the beginning I would read either some news that I had found or something interesting, or like something that was hard to believe about the world. And I would have like a scientific fact of the day aspect of my radio show. And then later, after I finished my PhD, I left academia for a while. I was working in a startup, and then I wanted to help all these people that I met and all the amazing work that I know is happening in universities, and try to figure out what is like the nicest and the best way to communicate that work into a wider audience. So I think I had an experience where I read some news about a drug about cancer or something like that. I don't remember the specifics right now, but I remember reading through the comments section of Reddit, and I was reading many, many people complaining that, oh yeah, I've heard about this drug before, but big pharma companies don't want you to get well, so you will never hear it again, and stuff like that. And I don't know biology, but I have a lot of friends that do, and I've talked a lot about them about drug discovery, and I know what it takes to go from like the initial result of like, this might be able to help with cancer or whatever, to that actually being implemented into a wider audience. So I realized that I really, really wanted to do something like that so that I can make all these new research findings more accessible to anybody who would listen.
On your podcast, do you tell people about things like new interesting things you find?
So what I do is I find new journal publications in academia. If you're doing research, the one of the goals is to, when you're doing the research, you do the tests again and again. Then you write a paper, you write an essay, and you publish it as in the form of an article in a scientific journal. So I look through these journals, and then when I find something that I see myself having more questions on, or I find the initial article, and then I find myself 3 hours later in the internet rabbit hole trying to figure out exactly what this is that I'm trying to do. I realize that I enjoy this, so I'm curious about it. So I email the person who is doing the research, and I'm asking them to be part of my podcast, so that they could explain better than me, because they did the research. They could explain to me first what it is that they're doing, why is it important, and then I try to create like audio documentaries, because that's the type of podcast that I like to listen to, and I try to create those types of audio documentaries based on their work, through the journey of me understanding what it is that they're doing. I'm trying to explain their work.
Oh, that sounds really interesting. I'm going to listen to it. And I heard you also run a blog. Can you tell me more about it?
Yeah, I started the newsletter, the blog/newsletter, as I was trying to figure out a more consistent way of interacting with my audience. One of the things that every podcaster is telling you that you should do, I don't know if that's true or not, is to create a mailing list with all the people that are listening to you, and do email marketing. Basically, create content and just be constantly communicating with them. So I realized, especially through the pandemic, that I really enjoyed also not only having the conversations and trying to understand what this is, but also while I'm going through the rabbit hole of the internet and I read through different parts, through different things about science that I'm fascinated about, I try to write these things down about the news, and I try to explain like different scientific concepts, different science discoveries that I see every week on the internet. I explain them into a weekly newsletter that I release every Wednesday.
Yeah, I've read some of your blogs. They're really interesting. And you also do this thing called science in video games, right?
Yes, that's true. So in July this year, I started a new series of newsletters where I'm also a video gamer. I really, really enjoy video games. And I was trying to figure out a better way to focus the audience that I'm trying to reach. And but at the same time, I did not want to do something that I know nothing about. So video games is something that I've enjoyed since I was very, very probably your age. I've played a lot of video games since I was your age. And I wanted to find an aspect of the video game, of a specific video game, and try to see if this could have happened in real life. What are the scientific principles, and what are the scientific facts that would allow it to happen? And also at the same time, if it's not possible, then also highlight, okay, this is why it's not possible, because we can't fly, for example, or whatever. So I've had this is more of a longer blog post, newsletter, because it takes me a little bit more time to do the research, because it's about topics that I really sometimes know nothing about. I wrote a newsletter about a game called Disco Elysium, and I had to write a lot about pharmaceuticals and alcohol and what all these things do to your body. And then I wrote another article about the game called Hollow Knight, which is a platformer. And in that, there was a lot of you were upgrading the sword that you were holding, and you were upgrading it with a specific type of material. And as a material scientist, I found it very, very interesting to figure out what is this material and how could a material, if it be infused in a sword in your weapon, how could it make it better? So that's the other game, and I have a lot of games that I'm writing about as well.
Well, I can't wait for the next post.
Yeah, thank you. The next post is going to be about a very famous game called Assassin's Creed. It's a very big big game, and I'm trying to figure out about the idea about if the in the Assassin's Creed the whole point is that you live the memories of your ancestors because these memories are stored in your DNA somehow. That's the whole science fiction part of the game. So I'm trying to figure out, I'm writing a story about how much data would that be if that was true? How much data would you need? How much data would one lifetime, like if you live for 75 years and you store all the experiences you've had in a hard drive, how much space would that take? Things like that.
Wow, that's really interesting. I can't wait to read it.
Thank you.
Can you tell me a little about your podcasting process?
Yes, of course. So because my podcast, as I told you, it's like it's not a discussion format. It's a documentary style format. It takes a lot of time to edit. So as I said, I find the person after I read the article. I send them an email. We set up a time, and then we start. We have like usually a 1 hour or 1.5 hour discussion about their topic. And I say it in the podcast very often, and I say it all the time, that I have no shame as a person. So if I need to ask a lot of what's considered stupid questions in order for me to understand what the topic is, then I'll just ask as many stupid questions as I can in order to understand it. So I don't feel a lot of shame about doing that. So it takes a lot of time, 1 to 1.5 hours to do a discussion about their work. And then it takes me about 4 to 5 hours afterwards, where I re-listen to the discussion and I sit down and I write a script for myself, so that if somebody who has not listened to this discussion wants to understand something, so I write a script and I try to explain some things before somebody just listens into the discussion that we're having. So it takes me about like 4 or 5 hours to finish an edit, which would be around half an hour to 45 minutes of the podcast. And then after that, I upload it on my hosting service, and then I try to do as much marketing as I can. But that's my weakest part as a podcaster. I try to see how to reach as many people as possible.
Yeah, for me, it's only interviews.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just interview somebody like I'm doing with you right now, and I edit it and put it up.
Okay. How long does the editing take for you?
Well, I guess 1.5 hours.
Okay.
At the max 2 hours.
Yeah. Sometimes like audio editing will take a little time, depending. Sometimes like the other person might not have a very good sound source, so you have to like edit parts out. Yeah, it takes a long time. Editing is a thankless job because it takes a long time to do.
Yeah, it does. How do you find guests to be on your podcast?
Initially, it was I interviewed a lot of friends initially because it was my first few episodes. So, for example, my first episode, it was not a friend. My first episode is I asked one of my closest friends if I could interview her supervisor. And her supervisor agreed, and I interviewed him, and it was nice about cognitive neuroscience. Then that was before COVID, because initially my idea was to interview people in Singapore and go in their labs and have a discussion, maybe even see the lab, see what they're working on. But then COVID happened, so I could not just visit anybody's lab anymore. So I started interviewing friends that I had that I met during my PhD, and then they had traveled to work in different universities all around the world. But thankfully, because in research projects, when a team signs a research with a university and needs to do a research with the university tells them that they need to do some number of like media outreach, and podcasts count as media outreach. So sometimes I've had people from that are friends or colleagues of my friends that have listened to my podcast and asked if they could be on because they have a new paper out. I had a couple of people who, after being for the first time on my podcast, after they released another paper, they wanted to come back again, because I had a friend who was doing initially research with glues. He was using spider webs to make glue. So that was very interesting. And then a couple of years after that, he released another paper where he made construction material and bricks out of Mars dust and human sweat. So it was very, very interesting to me to see how we could, whenever we colonize Mars, if that will ever happen, you can't actually transfer cement and water and all these things up there because they're heavy and it's going to cost a lot of money to do so. So he found a way to use Mars dust, thing that it's already on Mars, and sweat, human fluids, to make a construction material that would be sturdy enough to make houses. So I couldn't say no to having that podcast because that was very, very interesting.
That sounds really, really interesting.
I know, even though I'm not sure if we are going, maybe in your lifetime, people will start colonizing other planets. I don't know if in my lifetime this is going to happen, but yeah, it's very, very interesting to see what solutions will be there.
Yeah, I don't think we need it though, because if we start taking care of our planet, we won't need to use it.
Yeah, that is true. Yes, there's a point. It was like, you also sometimes you might think that you hope we don't colonize other planets soon because we need to take care of our planet now.
Yep. Yeah. And if we colonize other planets, we'll be focused on them and not this one.
Exactly. We'll never learn.
How do you gauge which topics would interest your listeners more?
That is an interesting question. So a lot of times, initially, it was a lot of trial and error because I didn't have a lot of listeners. So I would just go by what interested me. And sometimes, to be honest, I still do. If I find something that excites me, I will do the podcast regardless because I want to find out about it. And there's a thing that if I think something is important, I want to make sure that other people understand my point of view and understand why it is important. So I do that anyway. But in terms of engagement with people, I see the numbers both on the newsletter is another nice indication because the newsletter is a bit more often. I do it more often. I do it every week. So I see the topics that I have in the newsletter and which ones get more traction. And then I try to move my podcast content towards that. And I saw that even though I understand and it's easier for me to create nice stories from very engineering and hard science, sometimes what keeps people very, very interested is social science a lot, psychology, things that they would normally interact in the real world more often. So that usually creates a bit more engagement.
That's interesting. For me, I actually don't stick to one certain set of topics, actually.
Yeah, so.
I actually, I find guests and I prepare questions for them. I don't really say, okay, so for these next few weeks, I'm going to only do this. But actually, for one season, I think season 2, it was only kids. I interviewed only kids who do stuff.
Oh, okay.
But the rest was mixed, like
That's
others
nice.
who do a bunch of different things.
Yeah, that's nice. Yeah, I think it's yeah, depending on I think in the end, as long as you keep your own style and you don't change the whole style a lot, and you don't like adapt all the time. If the content that the type of content you put out is the same, the actual specific the topic doesn't really matter. It's your spin in it that you need to find. Because, for example, you mentioned that you prepare your questions. Initially, I prepared my questions as well. I was like trying to make sure that I have all the questions that I like. I was reading the paper and I say, okay, I don't understand this. I don't understand this. But then I realized that when I did that, I was making sure that I ask all of my questions, and I was not really paying attention to how the other person would emotionally react to my questions. So I would miss a lot of things that would be interesting, I think, for people and for myself. So after a while, I actually stopped in preparing for the interview. I just know that, okay, this is a person that does material science, or this is a person that does batteries or psychology. I just know the overall topic, and then I just go as a blank piece of paper just to have a feel from that person as well, because I realize that if I manage to figure out what excites them about their topic, it makes the content and makes the podcast a bit more lively and easier to listen to, because we can hear it in their voice, and the stories become more vivid, and it's nicer to listen to.
Yeah, that's a nice way of doing it. For me, I don't only stick to my questions, but I don't also not make questions. For me, it's in between. For most of my interviews, actually almost all of my interviews, I researched, put down questions, but I also do follow-up questions.
I think that this is a better way of doing it.
Yeah.
I think I'm to be honest, after I realized that I can do it without preparing questions, I was like, yeah, I might be a little bit lazy, and I like, if I can do it without questions, I will do it without questions.
Yeah. Yeah. For me, it's just sometimes I don't ask all of my questions. Maybe if, like, example, the person's already said something about it. Yeah. For like interviews like my dad, where I've known what he's done for 9 years, I just write the introduction, state, and just think of my own questions as I'm doing.
Yeah, it's good.
Yeah, it is. I find it easy to do this. I've never tried not making questions. What's the biggest challenge you have faced running this podcast?
So when I was thinking of starting the podcast, I always had my experience as a radio producer in my head. And as a radio producer, what I needed to do is on Thursday and Friday, before I had my shows on Saturday and Sunday, I would spend some time preparing to see what music I'm going to play, what topics I'm going to discuss about, see if I have an interview or something. I worked a lot before the interview, before my radio show. Then I would go to the studio, spend 2 hours, do the radio show, and then that's it. I would not touch any more of the episode. Now for podcasting is the opposite, and it took me a long time to get into the rhythm of I first need to do the interview, and then need to do all the other work after the interview, which is either editing or making sure that there is a cohesive story. Because if I wanted to make a story out of my radio show, I needed to prepare before that. While I'm making the story after I do the interview, and then also trying to do all the marketing, because right now I'm by myself. Before, when I was in the radio show, I was basing my marketing on what the radio station was doing. So I did not really need anything else to do. I just need to take care of my 2 hours. Now it's more like I need to take care of everything. It's kind of like running a whole organization. You have to wear different multiple hats. And that was a bit challenging for me to do. In many ways, it's still challenging. I don't think I've unlocked it.
For me, with the help of my parents, it's not too hard.
That's nice.
Once you figure out how to do it, it isn't hard at all.
Yeah. It's just that you need to figure out the rhythm and like try to figure out, okay, these are like the steps that I need to take for each episode. After that, it's like riding a bike.
Yeah, podcasting as a platform is not as famous as in this part of the world. Are you seeing a growth in people's interest for podcasts?
Lately, I think so. I think the US is still the main like market in terms of podcasting, but Southeast Asia is slowly starting to grow. In my niche, in my like a small part where in academia, slowly podcasting is becoming a little bit more acceptable in terms of like media publishing for them. So now you can see that researchers and universities want to have podcasts out for them so that they can talk about their research and the news coming from their universities. So slowly it's growing. My listenership, is that a word? I think that's a word. Listenership. My audience is a nicer word. My audience mainly comes from Singapore, a lot of Europe. I have some listeners that are big. Some episodes that are very big in India, either because it's I have an Indian guest, or I guess the topic is very much of interest for them. But yeah, slowly, Southeast Asian numbers are growing.
Yeah, for me, I don't really look out how many people listen to my podcast, because for me mainly it's basically some people, because sometimes my parents have told me someone somewhere in Europe, in some small country in Europe, has listened to it.
Yeah.
But mainly it's all in India and US, where it's my family and my parents' friends and my friends.
Yeah, that's nice.
Mainly all family and friends.
Yeah, I think to be honest, I don't look to audience too much as well, because I like creating the stories in that audio documentary style, and I like to get that experience for myself so that I can make it better. And yeah, but at the same time, there's that small like since the metric is there, I'm curious and I want to see like how does that better if I change this. I guess my scientific mind goes like, oh, if I do this experiment with the podcast, what would this change if I do this? So yeah, I do take a look at my numbers, but it's not a factor in me wanting or not wanting to do the podcast or the newsletter for that.
I don't care about my numbers.
Yeah, as long as you keep having fun and you're enjoying doing this podcast, it's fine. Like you have your own reason to do what you're doing. It's you're not doing something for other people. You're doing it for yourself, and as long as you're happy,
yeah, that it's for you, not for anybody else.
Yeah.
Who's the most interesting guest you've had?
This is a very hard question. It's like trying to figure out which pet is your favorite, or which parent is your favorite. So I have two episodes that I'll mention, and then I'll focus on one of the two. So I have one episode where I talk with an old friend of mine we did the PhD at the same time. He was a chemist, still is. But he's working now in a nonprofit called Sense About Science in the UK. And we had a very nice long discussion about the nature of evidence, and do people actually care about truth and facts? And because a lot of the time, it was during COVID, there was a lot of like vaccine hesitancy and people were not believing about COVID. So I it was a lot of time where I tried to figure out how to communicate with these people and how to make them see that vaccines are helpful and all of these things that we're trying to do to fight COVID are useful. And he told me a lot about how a lot of the people, when they are against COVID vaccines, for example, they don't really have an agenda. They do care about the science behind it, but because nobody has the patience to sit with them, or they haven't had the chance to be educated in their life and try to really understand why it is important and why is it true, they come from a place of fear. So if people talk down to them and dismiss them, that does not change them. So that makes them angry. That's because they're afraid. So they had a lot of campaigns that they saw that, and he told me about how they make them and what is their strategies and stuff like that. And I really, really enjoyed that podcast. But I think my favorite episode would have to be the one I talked with a psychologist. And it's my favorite for many, many reasons, because number one, I did not know that what sort of research psychologists do. I thought that psychology was something that you do with two people behind closed doors and a couch, and you talk about your childhood. That's what I thought psychology was. But he was doing research, and he was doing research about the psychology in heavy metal communities. And I still like heavy metal music. I used to be a lot more into it when I was younger, but I still really, really like it. And he was telling me about how some of the communities and some of the people who are underrepresented in society feel more at ease being in heavy metal communities, because, for example, there's a lot of stigma in societies about mental health issues. But in a lot of heavy metal bands, they talk about their mental health issues all the time. Many of them don't do it like in the correct way. Their facts are not all the way correct, but the fact that there is already discussion about it there in that community already makes people feel more welcome in them, so they're not alone, and they can have an outlet for them to discuss about themselves and feel more at ease being themselves. And I think I really, really enjoy that because of how engaging Kyle Messick was, the psychologist. And I think because deep down, when I was a kid, when I was in school, when I was your age, I think the only person who was listening to heavy metal in my school, and I was not the most popular person at the time. I think it resonated a bit more with me. So that will be my favorite.
Yeah, both of those episodes sound really, really interesting. I'm going to listen to them.
Thank you. I know that my answers become a bit more long-winded and I talk a lot, but I hope it's I answered your questions well.
Oh, you did. Do you have any tips for me and other young podcasters?
I think we mentioned it a little bit earlier. Don't do the podcast for somebody else. One of the main things is that you do the podcast and you do go through the whole process because you enjoy the process and you enjoy seeing the fruits of your labor. You understand what it is that you're trying to do. And one other thing that I'm slowly I did not figure it out. I figured out by myself as well, but is that the podcasting world and like the information, we live in the information age, right? There's so much information thrown at us every day. And you, as a podcaster, you enter a specific niche with the topic of your podcast. Try to figure out what do you have to offer that is not there. And it might be a different way of offering something. It might be a different opinion. It might be something else. But try to figure out exactly what is that difference that you have to offer, and lean in that a lot, so that if you enjoy what you're doing and you're offering it in a different way, it doesn't necessarily have to be an amazing or compelling way, but it's a different way, then I believe that this will eventually get traction, and people will want to listen to you because it will be different.
Yeah, those are some really, really nice tips. Dear listeners, please follow these tips if you want to start a podcast or are already running one and want to make it better. What are your hobbies?
So I have different hobbies. I'm an improviser. I do improv theater where we basically go on stage and we make plays out of thin air, out of like a couple of suggestions from the audience, and we make 1 hour or half an hour, 1 hour plays for that. We have a festival happening this week. I'm not sure when the podcast is going to be out, but so 22nd to 25th of, let me see if I get the date right. Yes, 22nd to 25th of September. It's going to be the Singapore Improv Festival. There will be teams from all around the world coming to perform here in Singapore at the Aliwal Arts Center. I am also, as I said before, I had a music radio show when I was in Greece. I like listening to a lot of music. I like writing, and I helped co-found I started with a bunch of friends website where we write our opinions and reviews about new music coming out every so often whenever new music that we like is out. It's called progrox.gr. It's both in Greek and in English, so don't worry about me being Greek and that .gr at the end. But yeah, a lot of music, and I never played an instrument, but I really enjoy looking into the story and looking into the backstories of the songs and the bands. So I do that.
I'll make sure to check out your website.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I also cook a lot. I don't know if that.
Yeah. The only thing I know how to cook is sandwiches.
Sandwiches are one of my favorite things to eat.
And one of my favorite things to cook.
I hope that I can have one of your sandwiches then soon.
Yeah. Yeah, my parents say they really like it.
Nice. What do you put in the sandwiches?
For my dad, I put peanut butter, jam, and any fruit. Sometimes it's strawberries, sometimes it's apples, sometimes it's banana.
Nice.
Yeah. And for my mom, I put only like jam or Nutella sometimes.
Sweet sandwiches, nice.
Yeah. Basically whatever they like and want.
Yeah. What about you? What's your favorite sandwiches? What do you like to eat?
Both. I like both the types I make. I like everything.
Nice.
Yeah. Thank you so much for coming on my show.
Thank you very much for having me. I really enjoyed talking to you. You have a very, very nice energy, always with a big smile. And it's very nice to talk to you.
Yeah, I really enjoyed talking to you too.
I hope I'm waiting for the season 6 of your podcast then. And I'll be very excited to listen to what the future holds for you. I really enjoy your podcast.
Yeah, it's coming in some time.
Perfect.
Season 6.
Exciting.
Dear listeners, follow my Facebook page, Curious Vedant, to get updates on my coming episodes. To listen at leisure on your phone and get notified about future episodes, subscribe by searching for Curious Vedant wherever you get your podcasts, such as Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, and many more. You can also listen to my show on CuriousVedant.com. Thank you for listening to Curious Vedant. And don't forget to rate and leave comments.